Good evening. Welcome to Lumina Theatre Group's performance reading of Emma by Jane Austen, adapted from the novel by John O'Connor. We're glad you could join us this evening, the second play reading in our four-play spring series. The play will last about 90 minutes with one 5-minute intermission. Now sit back, relax with your favorite snack and beverage, and enjoy our performance of Emma.
Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her.
She was the younger of two daughters of a most affectionate, indulgent father, long since a widower, and had been a mistress of his house for a very early period. Her mother had died in Emma's childhood, and her place had been supplied by Miss Taylor, an excellent governess who had fallen little short of mother in affection.
But then sorrow befell Emma in the shape of Miss Taylor's marriage to Mr. Weston, and while there was some satisfaction in considering with what self-denying, generous friendship Emma had always wished and promoted the match, the absence of Miss Taylor, more a sister than governess, would be felt every hour of every day.
An absence also sorely felt by Emma's elderly and somewhat self-centered father.
Poor Miss Taylor. I wish she were here again. What a pity it is that Mr. Weston ever thought of her.
I cannot agree with you, Papa. You know I cannot. Mr. Weston is a good-humoured, pleasant, excellent man, and you would not have had Miss Taylor live with us forever, when she might have a house of her own.
A house of her own? But where's the advantage of a house of her own? This house is 3 times as large.
And so Emma would continue to mollify her father until the welcome interruptions of
Mr. Knightley, a sensible man in his early 30s and a very old and intimate friend of the family.
It is very kind of you, Mr. Knightley, to come out at this late hour to call upon us. I'm afraid you must have had a shocking walk.
Oh, not at all, sir. It is a beautiful moonlit night, and so mild that I must draw right back from your great fire.
But you must have found it very damp and dirty. I wish you may not catch cold.
Dirty, sir. Look at my shoes, not a speck on them.
Well, that is quite surprising, though we've had a vast deal of rain here. I wanted them to put off poor Miss Taylor's wedding this morning.
Poor Mr. and Miss Woodhouse, if you please, but I cannot possibly say poor Miss Taylor. It must be better for her to have only one person to please than two.
especially when one of those two is such a fanciful, troublesome creature. That is what you would say if my father were not by.
I believe it is very true, my dear. Indeed, I am afraid I am sometimes very fanciful and troublesome.
My dearest Papa, you do not think it could mean you. I meant only myself. Mr. Knightley loves to find fault with me. You know, in a joke. It is all a joke. We always say what we like to one another.
Mr. Knightley, in fact, was one of the few people who could see faults in Emma, and the only one who ever told her of them. As for Miss Taylor, every friend must be glad to have her so happily married.
And you have forgotten one matter of joy to me, that I made the match myself.
You made the match. You made a lucky guess, and that is all that can be said.
But, my dear, pray do not make any more matches. They are silly things and break up one's family circle grievously.
Oh, only one more, Papa, only for Mr. Elton. I must look about for a wife for him. He has been our parson here a whole year and has fitted up his house so comfortably that it would be a shame to have him single any longer.
If you want to show him any attention, my dear, ask him to come and dine with us someday. That would be a much better thing.
Yes, invite him to dinner, Emma, and help him to the best of the chicken, but leave him to choose his own wife. Depend upon it, a man of 6 or 7 and 20 can take care of himself.
Well, that, of course, is a matter of opinion. In the context of which...
Harriet Smith was the natural,
in other words, illegitimate,
daughter of Somebody.
And Emma had taken her under her wing.
So, what do you think, Miss Woodhouse?
About your acquaintance?
Mr. Robert Martin, yes.
Emma knew Robert Martin as one of Mr. Knightley's tenant farmers. She knew Mr. Knightley thought highly of him.
What Emma felt, he must be coarse and unpolished and very unfit to be the intimate of a girl who wanted only a little more knowledge and elegance to be quite perfect. So what sort of looking man is Mr. Martin?
Oh, not handsome. Not at all handsome. I thought him very plain at first, but I do not think him so plain now. But did you ever see him? He has passed you very often.
A young farmer is the very last sort of person to raise my curiosity. The yeomanry are precisely the order of people with whom I feel I can have nothing to do.
To be sure. Oh, yes.
It was only a few days after this exchange that Emma and Harriet encountered Robert Martin on one of their walks.
So what do you think?
He is very plain, undoubtedly, remarkably plain, but that is nothing compared with his entire want of gentility. I had no right to expect much, but I had no idea he could be so very clownish. I had imagined him, I confess, a degree or two nearer gentility.
To be sure, he is not so genteel as a real gentleman.
Indeed, no. Compare him, for example, with, say, a new vicar, Mr. Elton. Compare their manner of carrying themselves, of gesture, of speaking.
Good day, Miss Smith. Good day, Miss Woodhouse.
You must see the difference.
Oh, there is a great difference.
Mr. Elton seems to me to be grown particularly affable in our company of late. If he means anything by it, it must be to please you. And so the ground was laid. Harriet would marry Mr. Elton, and Emma would bring it about. Oh.
Miss Woodhouse, I so admire the way you have transformed Miss Smith. You have made her graceful and easy. She was a beautiful creature when she came to you, but in my opinion, the attractions you have added are infinitely superior to what she received from nature.
I am glad you think I have been useful to her, but Harriet only wanted drawing out. She had all the natural grace of sweetness of temper and artlessness in herself. I have done very little.
If it were admissible to contradict a lady.
I have perhaps given her a little more decision of character, have taught her to think on points which had not fallen in her way before.
Exactly so. That is what principally strikes me. Skillful has been the
Oh,
hand.
great has been the pleasure, I am sure. I never met with a disposition more truly amiable.
I have no doubt of it.
And it was spoken with a sort of sighing animation, which had a vast deal of the lover in it. What an exquisite possession a good picture of her would be. I almost long to draw her portrait myself.
It would indeed be a delight. Let me entreat you, Miss Woodhouse, to exercise so charming a talent in favour of your friend. And as you will do it, Miss Woodhouse, it will indeed be an exquisite passion.
I do not know what your opinion may be, Mrs. Weston, of this great intimacy between Emma and Harriet Smith, but I think it a bad thing.
A bad thing? Why so?
I think Harriet Smith the very worst sort of companion that Emma could possibly have. She knows nothing herself and looks upon Emma as knowing everything.
Well, I cannot lament the acquaintance. How well Emma looked last night.
Oh, you would rather talk of a person than her mind, would you? Very well, I shall not attempt to deny Emma's being pretty.
Pretty? Say beautiful, rather. Can you imagine anything nearer perfect beauty than Emma altogether? Face and figure?
I do not know what I could imagine, but I confess that I have seldom seen a face or figure more pleasing to me than hers. I love to look at her. She always declares she will never marry, which of course means just nothing at all. I should like to see Emma in love and in some doubt of a return. It would do her good.
Over the following week, Harriet sat for her portrait, Mr. Elton constantly in attendance.
Everybody who saw the finished drawing was pleased, but Mr. Elton was in continual raptures and defended it through every criticism.
I never saw such a likeness in my life.
You have made her too tall, Emma.
Oh, Emma knew that she had, but she would not own it.
Oh, no, not in the least too tall. Consider, she is sitting down, which naturally presents a different, which in short gives precisely and the proportions must be, oh no, it gives one exactly the idea of such a height as Miss Smith's. Exactly so, indeed.
It is very pretty, Emma, just as your drawings always are, my dear. The only thing I do not thoroughly like is that she seems to be sitting out of doors with only a little shawl over her shoulders, and it makes one think she must catch cold.
But, my dear Papa, it is supposed to be summer, a warm day in summer.
Ah, but it is never safe to sit out of doors, my dear.
I must confess that I regard it as a most happy thought, the placing of Miss Smith out of doors and the trees touched with such inimitable spirit. I cannot keep my eyes from it. I never saw such a likeness.
We must have it framed.
Really?
Oh, might I be trusted with the commission? What infinite pleasure should I have in executing it? I could ride to London at any time. I cannot express how much I should be gratified by being employed on such an errand.
I would not give you
But it is such a long
honor.
ride.
Very
Think
kind.
of the poor horse.
So Mr. Elton was to take the drawing to London, choose the frame, and collect it when ready. Emma was concerned not to inconvenience Mr. Elton, while he seemed most fearful of not being inconvenienced enough.
What a precious deposit.
While the portrait was being framed, Emma found herself in a position to do another particular service for Harriet, for Robert Martin had written her a letter of proposal.
Will you read the letter? Pray do.
Emma was not sorry to be pressed. She read and was surprised. The style of the letter was much above her expectation. There were not merely no grammatical errors, but as a composition, it would not have disgraced a gentleman.
Is it a good letter?
Yes, indeed, a very good letter. So good a letter, Harriet, that everything considered, I think one of his sisters must have helped him. I can hardly imagine the young man whom I saw talking with you the other day could express himself so well if left quite to his own powers.
Well, and what shall I do?
What shall you do? You must answer it, of course, and speedily.
Yes, but what shall I say? Dear Miss Woodhouse, do advise me.
Oh, no. The letter had much better be all your own. Your meaning must be perfectly clear, and I am sure you will know how to express your gratitude for the offer and your concern for the pain and disappointment you are inflicting upon him.
Oh, you think I ought to refuse him then?
To refuse him? My dear Harriet, are you in any doubt as to that? I thought, but I beg your pardon, perhaps I have been under a mistake. I had imagined you were consulting me only as to the wording of it. So you mean to return a favorable answer?
No, I do not. That is, I do not mean. What shall I do? What would you advise me to do? Pray, dear Miss Woodhouse, tell me what I ought to do.
I shall not give you any advice, Harriet. I will have nothing to do with it. This is a point which you must settle with your feelings.
I had no notion he liked me so very much.
I lay it down as a general rule, Harriet, that if a woman doubts as to whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him. I thought it my duty as a friend and older than yourself to say thus much to you, but do not imagine that I want to influence you.
It will be safer to say no, perhaps. Do you think I had better say no?
Not for the world would I advise you either way. You must be the best judge of your own happiness. If you prefer Mr. Martin to every other person, and can think of no other man who might have shown an interest in you.
Mr. Elton, you mean? Oh, Miss Woodhouse, as you would not give me your opinion, I must do as well as I can by myself. And I have now quite determined and really almost made up my mind to refuse Mr. Martin. Do you think I am right?
Perfectly, perfectly right, my dearest Harriet. You are doing just what you ought. Well, you were at all in doubt. I kept my feelings to myself, but now that you are so completely decided, I have no hesitation in approving. Dear Harriet, I give myself joy of this. It would have grieved me to lose your acquaintance, for I could not have visited Mrs. Robert Martin of Abbey Mill Farm. Ugh.
You could not have visited me. I never thought of that before. Well, that would have been too dreadful. Oh, what an escape.
Indeed, Harriet, you would have thrown yourself out of all good society. Think of it, confined to the society of the illiterate and vulgar all your life.
I am quite determined to refuse him. But what shall I say?
Would you like me to help you?
Oh, please, Miss Woodhouse, you are such a good friend.
The letter was written and sealed and sent. The business was finished and Harriet was safe. And though Harriet spent an unhappy evening, contemplating what she had lost, Emma revived her spirits by reminding her of Mr. Elton, who was no doubt at that very moment thinking about Harriet. All was well.
She refused him. Harriet Smith refused Robert Martin. Madness, if it is so, but I hope you are mistaken.
I saw her answer. Nothing could be clearer.
You saw her answer. You wrote her answer too. Emma, this is your doing. You persuaded her to refuse him.
And if I did, I should not feel that I had done wrong. Mr. Martin is a very respectable young man, but I cannot admit him to be Harriet's equal.
Not Harriet's equal? No, he is not her equal indeed, for he is as much her superior in sense as in situation. Emma, your infatuation about that girl blinds you. She is not a sensible girl. She has been taught nothing useful and is too young and too simple to have acquired any education herself. She is pretty and she is good-tempered, and that is all.
You are not just to Harriet's claims. Mr. Martin may be the richer of the two, but he is undoubtedly her inferior as to rank in society. The sphere in which she moves is much above his. It would be a degradation.
A degradation to illegitimacy and ignorance, to be married to a respectable, intelligent gentleman farmer.
As to the circumstances of her birth, she is not to pay for the offence of others. That she is a gentleman's daughter is indubitable to me. That she associates with gentlemen's daughters, no one, I apprehend, will deny. She is superior to Mr. Robert Martin.
She was as happy as possible with the Martins in the summer. She had no sense of superiority then. If she has it now, you have given it. You have been no friend to Harriet Smith, Emma.
Emma was not to be downhearted, for encouraging news reached her ears only the next morning.
Namely, that Mr. Elton had been encountered riding off to London on business that he announced he would not consider putting off for any inducement in the world.
Oh, and it was not long before Emma reported this event to Harriet, making its significance abundantly clear.
Me? That Mr. Elton should really be in love with me. Me, of all people, who did not know him. To speak to him, Michaelmas, and he the very handsomest man that ever was, a man that everybody looks up to, quite like Mr. Knightley.
Harriet was to have the chance of seeing Mr. Elton again very soon, for she was to be one of a party to dine with Mr. and Mrs. Weston on Christmas Eve. But that day Harriet was stricken with a cold and was confined to her bed.
And when the company was seated around the Westons' table, Emma found herself singularly disappointed to observe that Mr. Elton displayed no grief at Harriet's absence, but instead was notably jolly and light-hearted.
Oh, yes, yes, very good.
The evening wore on, the conversation turned to the subject of Frank Churchill, a young man who requires some introduction.
Ah, yes, indeed. Mr. Weston.
Poor Miss Taylor's new husband.
Mr. Weston, as I say, had a son by a previous marriage.
One Frank Churchill, who had taken the surname of the extremely rich aunt and uncle who had adopted him as a baby.
and on whom he was now wholly financially dependent.
Mr. Weston saw his son every year in London and was proud of him, and his fond report of Frank as a very fine young man had made Highbury feel a sort of pride in him too.
Mr. Frank Churchill was one of the boasts of Highbury, and everyone had a lively curiosity to see him.
The compliment was so little returned that he had never been there in his adult life. His coming to visit his father had been often talked of, but never achieved.
Now, upon his father's marriage, it was very generally proposed, as most proper attention, that the visit should take place. Indeed, there was much discussion of the coming event, not least around the Westons' dinner table.
Mother! I suppose you have heard of the handsome letter Mr. Frank Churchill has written to his new stepmother, Mrs. Weston. I understand it was a very handsome letter indeed. Mr. Woodhouse told me of it, and Mr. Woodhouse saw the letter, and he says he never saw such a handsome letter in his life. What?
We are introducing Mrs. Bates, the widow of a former vicar of Highbury, a very old lady, almost past everything but tea and card games.
And her single daughter, Miss Bates, who lived with her in a very small way.
Her daughter enjoyed a most uncommon degree of popularity for a woman neither young, rich, nor married. Her youth had passed without distinction, and her middle life was devoted to the care of a failing mother and the endeavor to make a small income go as far as possible.
And yet she was a happy woman, and a woman whom no one named without goodwill.
I will not positively answer for my having never mentioned the letter before, because I know I do sometimes pop out a thing before I am aware. I am a talker, you know. I am rather a talker. And now and then I have let a thing escape me, which I have later forgot I have said.
A quality which exactly suited Mr. Woodhouse, full of trivial communications and harmless gossip.
Gossip which turns to the next of our major characters, Miss Bates's niece, Jane Fairfax.
You know her, Miss Woodhouse?
Oh, yes, we are always forced to be acquainted whenever she comes to Highbury. Heaven forbid that I should ever bore people half so much about all the Woodhouses put together as Miss Bates does about Jane Fairfax. One is sick of the very name of Jane Fairfax. Every letter from her is read 40 times over, and if she does but knit a pair of garters for her grandmother, one hears of nothing else for a month. I wish Jane Fairfax very well, but she tires me to death.
Very good.
That sweet, amiable Jane Fairfax. It is so long, Mr. Woodhouse, since I have seen her. I always regret excessively on a dear Emma's account that she cannot be more at Highbury. She would be such a delightful companion for Emma.
Oh, our little friend Harriet Smith, however, is just such another pretty kind of young person. Emma could not have a better companion than Harriet.
Of course, but Jane Fairfax is so very accomplished and superior, and exactly Emma's age.
It is not difficult to see why this might irritate Emma.
By contrast, there was something in the name, in the idea of Mr. Frank Churchill, which always interested Emma. She had frequently thought of that if she were to marry, he was the very person to suit her in age, character, and condition.
And she had a great curiosity to see him, a decided intention of finding him pleasant, liked by him to a certain degree, and a sort of pleasure in the idea of their being coupled in their friends' imaginations. The pleasant evening would come to an end, and, with Mr. Woodhouse offering to take Mrs. and Miss Bates home, Emma found herself sharing a carriage with Mr. Elton. It would be the ideal opportunity to talk of Harriet. Will this snow persist? Do you hear, Mr. Elton?
I am emboldened to express the sentiments which must already be well known to you.
What?
Hoping, fearing, adoring, ready to die if you refuse me.
Mr. Elton?
But flattering myself that my ardent attachment and unequaled love and unexampled passion cannot fail to have some effect.
Please stop there, Mr. Elton.
In short, very much resolved on being seriously accepted as soon as possible.
With without scruple, oh, without apology, without much apparent diffidence. Mr. Elton, the lover of Harriet, was professing himself Emma's lover. She tried to stop him, but vainly. He would go on and say it all.
On my knees. Somewhat difficult maneuver in a carriage. On my knees.
I'm very much astonished, Mr. Elton. This, to me. You forget yourself. You take me for my friend. Any message to Miss Smith I shall be happy to deliver. But no more of this to me, if you please.
Miss Smith? Message to Miss Smith? What can you possibly mean?
Miss Elton, my astonishment is much beyond anything I can express. After such attentions to Miss Smith as I have been in the daily habit of observing, to be addressing me in this manner.
Heavens, oh God. Miss Smith? I've never paid her any attentions. But as your friend, Miss Woodhouse. Who can think of Miss Smith when Miss Woodhouse is near? I thought only of you. Everything that I have said or done for many past weeks has been with the sole view of marking my adoration of yourself. You cannot really seriously doubt it. Charming Miss Woodhouse, allow me to interpret this interesting silence. It confesses that you have long understood me.
No, sir, it confesses no such thing. Am I to believe that you never sought to recommend yourself particularly to Miss Smith?
Never, madam, never, I assure you. Miss Smith is a very good sort of girl, and I should be happy to see her respectably settled. No doubt there are men who might not object to. Everybody has their level. But as for myself, I need not so totally despair of an equal alliance as to be addressing myself to Miss Smith. Oh, no, madam, my visits to Hartfield have been for yourself only. And the encouragement I received...
Encouragement? I gave you encouragement, sir. Sir, you have been entirely mistaken in supposing it. I have no thoughts of matrimony at present.
If there had been so much anger, there would have been desperate awkwardness.
In a few moments, they found themselves at the door of the vicarage, and Mr. Elton was out before another syllable passed.
Emma then felt it indispensable to wish him a good night.
Good night, Mr. Elton.
Good night, Miss Woodhouse.
And, under indescribable irritation of spirits, Emma was then conveyed home.
The following day, Emma's first thought was for Harriet. But she was also aware of the presumption in Mr. Elton. A man of no social connections whatsoever, in believing himself to be Emma's equal in wealth or breeding. He must know that the Woodhouses were the younger branch of a very ancient family, and that the Eltons were nobody.
The first error, and the worst, lay at Emma's door. It was foolish, it was wrong, to take so active a part in bringing any two people together. She was concerned and ashamed, and resolved to do such things no more.
I have actually talked poor Harriet into being very much attracted to this man. She might never have thought of him, but for me...
Mr. Elton, meanwhile, decided that the best course would be to absent himself for the immediate future.
Dear Mr. Woodhouse, Dear Mr. Woodhouse, I am proposing to leave Highbury this morning on my way to Bath, where in compliance with the pressing entreaties of some friends, I have engaged to spend a few weeks, and very much regret the impossibility I am under, from various circumstances, of whether in business, of taking personal leave of Mr. Woodhouse, of whose friendly civilities I shall ever remain grateful. Yours.
When Emma told Harriet about Mr. Elton's unfortunate misapprehension, she bore the intelligence very well.
I really don't consider myself as having anything to complain of. The affection of such a man as Mr. Elton would have been too great a distinction. I could never have disturbed him. And nobody could so partial and kind a friend as you, Miss Woodhouse. would have thought the alliance possible.
Mr. Frank Churchill did not come. When the time proposed drew near, Mrs. Weston's fears were justified in the arrival of a letter of excuse.
For the present, to my great mortification and regret, I am afraid I cannot be spared, but still look forward with hope of coming to visit you both at no distant period.
His aunt and uncle, the Churchills, are very likely in fault, but I dare say he could come if he wanted to.
I do not know why you should say so. He wishes exceedingly to come, but his uncle and aunt will not spare him.
If Frank Churchill had wanted to see his father, he would have contrived it between September and January. A man at his age, what is he, 3 or 4 and 20, can surely do as much as that.
That's easily said by you, who have always been your own master.
He can get away from the Churchills when he pleases. We hear of him forever at some seaside place or other.
He may at times be able to do a great deal more than he can at others.
There is one thing, Emma, which a man can always do, if he chooses, and that is his duty. It is Frank Churchill's duty to pay this attention to his father. He knows it to be so by his promises and messages, and if he wished to do it, it might be done.
You have wealth and independence and no understanding of what it means to have neither, to be wholly dependent on others to whom you have deferred all your life.
He should have stood up to them when he was younger. Had he done so, there would be no difficulty now. As for his letters, they disgust me.
They seem to satisfy everybody else.
I suspect they do not satisfy Mrs. Weston.
You seem determined to think ill of him.
Me? No, not at all. I would be ready to acknowledge his merits as any other man. But I hear of none, except that he is good-looking, with smooth, plausible manners.
Well, if he have nothing else to recommend him, he will be a treasure here at Highbury. Cannot you imagine, Mr. Knightley, what a sensation his coming will produce? There will be but one subject throughout the parishes, but one interest, one object of curiosity. It will all be Mr. Frank Churchill. We shall think and speak of nobody else.
You will excuse me of being so much overwhelmed. If I had find him conversable, I shall be glad of his acquaintance. But if he is only a chattering coxcomb, he will not occupy much of my time or thoughts. Frank Churchill, Emma, is a person I never think of from one month's end to another.
Why should he be so angry? To take a dislike to a young man, only because he appears to be of a different disposition from himself, is unworthy of Mr. Knightley's customary liberality of mind. I have never before for a moment supposed he could be so unjust to the merit of another. The following day, Emma visited Miss Bates and, as she had foreseen, was treated to a letter from Miss Bates' niece, Jane Fairfax.
I had it in my hand so very lately that I was almost sure it had been on the table. I was just reading it again to my mother, for it is such a pleasure to her, a letter from Jane, that she can never hear it often enough, so I knew it could not be far off. Oh, here it is, only just under my sewing. And since you are so kind as to wish to hear what she says, but first of all, I must really, in justice to Jane, apologize for her writing so short a letter, only 2 pages, you see, hardly 2, though in very small writing.
All this spoken extremely fast obliged Miss Bates to stop for breath, and Emma said something very civil about the excellence of Miss Fairfax's handwriting.
You are extremely kind, you who are such a judge and write so beautifully yourself. My mother does not hear. She is a little deaf, you know. Ma'am, do you hear what Miss Woodhouse is so obliging to say about Jane's handwriting? My mother's deafness is very trifling, you see, just nothing at all. But raising my voice and saying anything 2 or 3 times over, she is sure to hear. But it is very remarkable that she should always hear Jane better than she does me. Jane speaks so distinct.
Are you expecting Miss Fairfax here soon?
Oh, yes, next week.
Indeed, that must be very great pleasure.
Thank you. You are very kind. Yes, next week everybody is so surprised and everybody says the same obliging things. My mother is so delighted, for Jane is to be 3 months with us at least. The case is, you see, that the Campbells are going to Ireland. Mrs. Dixon has persuaded her father and mother to come over and see her directly.
And who, you are surely wondering, are the Campbells and the Dixons, and what do they have to do with our narrative?
A brief biography of Jane Fairfax.
Jane is the daughter of Miss Bates's sister, who died, as did Jane's father, one Lieutenant Fairfax, when she was a child.
Jane was raised initially by her aunt, Miss Bates, but when she was 9, she was given into the care of her father's former commanding officer, Colonel Campbell, to be educated alongside his daughter in London.
The Campbells did not have the money to provide for Jane beyond that, though, and as the Bateses were poor, it was decided early on that Jane would become a governess and provide for herself.
Last year, the Campbells' daughter married a Mr. Dixon, and Jane recently spent time with the Campbells and the Dixons in the seaside resort of Weymouth.
But, for reasons which will become clear later, Jane decided not to accompany them to Ireland, where Mr. Dixon lived, but to spend the summer in Highbury with her aunt and grandmother.
Mr. Dixon is a most amiable and charming young man. Ever since the service he rendered Jane at Weymouth, when they were out in a little boat and she almost fell over the side into the sea and would surely have been lost if he had not, with the greatest presence of mind, caught hold of her habit. I can never think
This moment,
how trembling.
an ingenious and animating suspicion entered Emma's brain with regarding Jane Fairfax,
Such a
this
fine
charming Mr. Dixon,
sure.
and her not going to Ireland. She asked,
Yes, entirely on her own doing.
but in spite of all her friend's persuasions and her own wish of seeing Ireland, Miss Fairfax proposed devoting the time to you and Mrs. Bates.
Yes, entirely her own doing, entirely her own choice.
But Mrs. Dixon must be very much disappointed. Mrs. Dixon, I understand, has no remarkable degree of personal beauty, is not by any means to be compared with Miss Fairfax.
Oh, no, you are very obliging to say such things, but certainly not. There's no comparing them. Miss Campbell always was absolutely plain, but extremely elegant and amiable.
Yes, that of course. So that was it. Jane Fairfax and the amiable and charming Mr. Dixon. Well.
With regard to Jane Fairfax not accompanying the Campbells to Ireland, her account to her aunt contained nothing but the truth, though there might be some truths not told.
Certain it was that she was to come, and that Highbury, instead of welcoming that perfect novelty which had long been promised, Mr. Frank Churchill,
must put up for the present with Jane Fairfax, who could bring only the freshness of a 2 years' absence.
Emma was sorry to have to pay civilities to a person she did not like through 3 long months.
Why she did not like Jane Fairfax might be a difficult question to answer. Mr. Knightley had once told her it was because Emma saw in her the really accomplished young woman which she wanted to be thought herself.
But Emma could never get close to her. She did not know how it was, but there was such coldness and reserve, and she was made such a fuss of by everybody.
But now, as she sat opposite Jane soon after her arrival, Emma made herself a promise that she would dislike her no longer. When she thought about Jane's history, indeed, her situation as well as her beauty, when she considered what all this elegance was destined to, what she was going to sink from, how she was going to live as a governess, it seemed impossible to feel anything but compassion and respect.
Were it not for Jane's irritating coldness, she had not a single interesting comment to make about Mr. Dixon. And when it turned out that Mr. Frank Churchill had also been at Weymouth,
we were little acquainted.
Did people find him handsome?
I believe he was reckoned a very fine young man.
Was he agreeable?
He was generally thought so.
Did he appear a sensible young man, a young man of information?
At a seaside resort, it was difficult to decide on such points. I believe everybody found his manners pleasing.
Cold. Emma could not forgive her.
You and Miss Fairfax both played very beautifully this evening, Emma. I was glad you made her play so much. For having no instrument at her grandmother's, it must have been a real indulgence.
I am happy you approved, but I hope I am not often deficient in what is due to guests at Hartfield.
No, my dear, that I am sure you are not. There is nobody half so attentive and civil as you are. If anything, you are too attentive. The muffins last night, if they had been handed around once, I think it would have been quite enough.
But if I understand you, Mr. Knightley, I have to observe that Miss Fairfax is reserved.
I always told you she was. A little, but she's also discreet, and what arises from discretion must be honored.
You think her merely diffident. I do not see it.
My dear Emma, you are not going to tell me, I hope, that you had not a pleasant evening?
Oh, no. I was pleased with my own perseverance in asking her questions, and amused to think how little information I obtained.
I am disappointed.
I hope everybody had a pleasant evening. I had. Once I felt the fire rather too much, but then I moved back my chair a little, very little, and it did not disturb me. Miss Jane Fairfax is a very pretty and very well-behaved young lady indeed. Oh, she must have found the evening agreeable, Mr. Knightley, because she had Emma.
True, sir. And Emma, because she had Miss Fairfax. Oh, Emma, I have a piece of news for you.
News? I always like news. What is it? Why do you smile so?
Mr. Elton is to be married.
Oh, dear.
Miss Hawkins of Bath, the daughter of a Bristol merchant, a new neighbour for us all, Miss Woodhouse. My mother is so pleased. This is great news indeed. Jane, you have never seen Mr. Elton. No wonder that you have such a curiosity to see him.
Jane's curiosity did not seem of that absorbing nature as wholly to occupy her.
No, I have never seen Mr. Elton. Is he a tall man?
Human nature is so well disposed towards those who are in interesting situations that a young person who either marries or dies is sure to be kindly spoken of.
Mr. Elton's bride-to-be, the charming Augusta Hawkins, in addition to all the usual advantages of perfect beauty and merit, was in possession of an independent fortune of some £10,000.
Mr. Elton was just the happy man he ought to be, talking only of himself and his own concerns, expecting to be congratulated, ready to be laughed at, and with cordial, fearless smiles, now addressing all the young ladies of the place. Good morning, Miss Perry, to whom, a few weeks ago, he would have been more cautiously gallant.
But even a coming marriage had to take place to the event of the year. A visit from Frank Churchill.
Oh, Emma could not be more excited. The Frank Churchill, so long talked of, so high in interest, was actually before her. He was presented to her and well, she did not think too much had been said in his praise.
He was a very good-looking young man, and his countenance had a great deal of the spirit and liveliness of his father's. He looked quick and sensible.
And Emma felt immediately that she should like him, and there was a well-bred ease of manner and a readiness to talk, which convinced her that he came intending to be acquainted with her, and that acquainted they soon must be.
A reasonable visit having been paid, Frank Churchill took a polite leave.
And while in Highbury, I must take the opportunity of paying a duty visit. I have the honour of being acquainted with a neighbour of yours, Mrs. Woodhouse, of the name of Fairfax. She's staying with a family by the name of Barnes or Bates or...
Mrs. and Miss Bates. True. You are acquainted with Miss Fairfax, Frank. I remember you knew her at Weymouth. And a fine girl she is. Call upon her by all means.
Oh, no, there's no necessity for my calling this morning. Another day would do as well.
Oh, go today. Do not defer it. You saw her with the Campbells when she was the equal of everybody she mixed with, but here she is with a poor old grandmother who has barely enough to live on. If you do not call early, it will be a slight.
I am convinced.
And so the required visit was paid, and it was not long before Emma had the opportunity of quizzing Frank further.
And how did you think Miss Fairfax was looking?
Ill. That is, if a young lady can never be allowed to look ill. But seriously, no, Miss Fairfax is naturally so pale, is almost always to give the appearance of ill health. It's a most deplorable want of complexion.
Did you see her often at Weymouth?
No, not often. Did you ever hear her play pianoforte?
Ever hear her? I have heard her every year of our lives since we both began. She plays charmingly.
You think so, do you? See, I wanted the opinion of someone who could really judge. In Weymouth, there was a Mr. Dixon who, though engaged to another lady, would always seem to prefer listening to Miss Fairfax. Now that, I thought, in a man of known musical talent was some proof.
Proof indeed. Mr. Dixon is very musical, is he? We shall know more about them all in half an hour from you than Miss Fairfax would have vouchsafed in half a year. I like Miss Fairfax, but I could never attach myself to anyone so completely reserved.
It is a most repulsive quality indeed. No, oftentimes very convenient, no doubt, but never pleasing. There's safety in reserve, but no attraction. One cannot love a reserved person.
Emma had formed a very good opinion of Frank Churchill, which was a little shaken the following day when she heard that he was gone off to London merely to have his hair cut. There was an air of foppery and nonsense about it which she could not approve.
Come, just the trifling, silly fellow I took him for.
He came back, had his hair cut, and laughed at himself with a very good grace, but without seeming really at all ashamed with what he'd done.
And I do not know whether he ought to be so. But certainly silly things do cease to be silly if they are done by sensible people in an impudent way.
There will now be an intermission of 5 minutes. And now, Act Two of Emma by Jane Austen.
Mrs. Weston had been calling on Miss Bates, and as soon as she entered the room had been struck by the sight of a pianoforte which had arrived the day before, to the great astonishment of both aunt and niece.
Miss Bates and Jane Fairfax herself were quite at a loss, quite bewildered to think who could possibly have ordered it.
But after some thought, they were both perfectly satisfied that it could be from only one quarter.
Of course it must be from Colonel Campbell.
Why do you smile?
Nay, why do you?
Me? I suppose I smile for pleasure at Colonel Campbell's being so rich and so liberal. It is a handsome present.
Very.
I rather wonder that such a gift has never been made before.
Well, perhaps Miss Fairfax has never been staying here so long before.
You may say what you choose, but your countenance testifies that your thoughts on this subject are very much like mine.
No, I smile because you smile, and shall probably suspect whatever I find you suspect. But if Colonel Campbell is not the person, who can be?
What do you say to Mr. and Mrs. Dixon?
Oh, the Dixons. Very true indeed. No, we were speaking the other day, you know, of Mr. Dixon's being so warm an admirer of her performance.
Yes, and what you told me on that head confirmed an idea which I had entertained before. I cannot help suspecting that, after making his proposals to Miss Campbell, Mr. Dixon had the misfortune to fall in love with Jane Fairfax.
Oh, it had never occurred to me. But now that I think about it, I have to admit your suspicions certainly have an air of great probability.
And then he saved her life. Did you ever hear of that? A water party, and by some accident she was falling overboard. He caught her.
He did. I was there, one of the party.
Were you really? Well, but you observed nothing, of course, for it seems to be a new idea to you. If I had been there, I think I should have made some discoveries.
Oh, I dare say you would. But simple I, saw nothing but the fact that Miss Fairfax was nearly dashed from the vessel and that Mr. Dixon caught her.
The arrival of this pianoforte is decisive with me. I wanted to know a little more, and this tells me quite enough. Depend upon it, we shall soon hear that it is a present from Mr. Dixon. I can see it in no other light than as an offering of love.
Over the next few days, Emma wrapped herself up in making plans for a coming ball to be held at the Crown Inn. But all was ruined when a letter arrived from Mr. Churchill to urge his nephew's instant return. Mrs. Churchill was unwell, far too unwell to do without him. Frank came to take his farewells. Emma was ready for her visitor some time before he arrived.
Of all horrid things, leave-taking is the worst.
But you will come again. This will not be your only visit to Randalls.
The uncertainty of when I may be able to return.
The poor ball must be quite given up.
That ball! Why did we wait for anything? Why not seize pleasure at once? You told us it would be so. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, why are you always so right?
Indeed, I am very sorry to be right in this instance.
Such a fortnight it has been. Every day more precious and more delightful than the day before, and every day making me less fit to bear any other place. Happy those who can remain at Highbury.
And you must be off this very morning?
Yes, no, my father is to join me. We shall walk back together, and I must be off immediately.
Not 5 minutes to spare even for your friends, Miss Fairfax and Miss Bates?
Oh, yes, I have already called there. Passing the door. I thought it better. It was the right thing to do. I went in for 3 minutes and was detained by Miss Bates's being absent. She was out. I felt it impossible not to wait till she came back in. She is a woman that one may, one must laugh at, but one would not wish to slight. It was better to pay my visit then. In short, perhaps, Miss Woodhouse, I think you can hardly be quite without suspicion.
You are quite in the right. It was most natural to pay your visit then. He was silent. She believed he was looking at her, probably endeavoring to interpret what she had just said. She heard him sigh. It was natural for him to feel that he had cause to sigh. He was more in love with her than Emma had supposed. And who can say how it might have ended if his father had not made his appearance?
Time to go, Frank.
I shall hear about you all. That is my chief consolation. Goodbye.
He is undoubtedly very much in love with me. Everything denotes it. Very much in love indeed. And I think I might be a little in love with him. But when he comes again, if his affection continue, I must be on my guard not to encourage it.
Luckily for Emma, she soon had other interests to occupy her, for Mr. Elton married his Augusta, and the good lady quickly established herself in Highbury society by visiting every neighbour of distinction.
Occasionally, she would be accompanied by Mr. Elton. Unfortunately, so one morning when Emma happened to be entertaining Harriet Smith.
And when Emma considered how peculiarly unlucky poor Mr. Elton was in being in the same room at once with the woman he had just married, the woman he wanted to marry, and the woman who he had been expected to marry, she must allow him to have the right to look as little really easy as could be.
I do admire your house, Miss Woodhouse. It so reminds me of Maple Grove. My brother, Mr. Suckling's seat. Is not it astonishingly like Mr. E? I assure you, Miss Woodhouse, it is very delightful to me to be reminded of a place I am so extremely partial to as Maple Grove. I have spent so many happy months there.
Really? And
we have been calling on the Westons. We found them both at home, and very pleasant people they seem to be. I like them extremely. She was your governess, I think. I was rather astonished to find her so very ladylike, but she is really quite the gentlewoman.
Mrs. Weston's manners, their propriety, simplicity, and elegance would make them a model for any young woman.
And who do you think came in while we were there?
I am at a loss.
Knightley! Knightley himself. I had never seen him before, and of course, as so particular a friend of Mr. E's, I had a great curiosity. Knightley is quite the gentleman. I like him very much. Decidedly, I think, a very gentleman-like man.
Insufferable woman! Oh, never seen him in her life before and calls him Knightley, and discovers that he is a gentleman. A little upstart, a vulgar being with her Mr. E.
Jane Fairfax is absolutely charming, Miss Woodhouse. I quite rave about Jane Fairfax, a sweet, interesting creature, so mild and ladylike, and with such talents. I must bring her forward. Such talents as hers must not be suffered to remain unknown.
Oh, poor Jane Fairfax. You have not deserved this. You may have done wrong with regard to Mr. Dixon, but this is a punishment beyond anything you can have merited. The kindness and protection of Mrs. Elton.
The evening of the ball was most unfortunately attended by heavy rain and by Mrs. Elton, who as ever considered herself to be the most important person in the room.
Nobody can think less of dress in general than I do. But upon such an occasion as this, when everybody's eyes are so much upon me, and in compliment to the Westons, who I have no doubt are giving this ball chiefly to do me honour, I would not wish to be inferior to others. And I see very few pearls in the room except mine.
Emma was disturbed by Mr. Knightley's not dancing, classing himself with the husbands and fathers, so young as he looked. His tall, firm, upright figure among the bulky forms and stooping shoulders of the elderly men was such as must draw everybody's eyes, and, excepting Frank Churchill, there was not one among the whole row of young men who could be compared with him.
The last two dances before supper were about to start, and Harriet had no partner. Do you dance, Mr. Elton?
Most readily, Miss Weston, if you will dance with me.
Oh, me? Oh no. I would get you a better partner than myself. I am no dancer.
If Mrs. Gilbert wishes to dance, I shall have great pleasure, I am sure, for though beginning to feel myself rather an old married man, and that my dancing days are over, it would give me very great pleasure at any time to stand up with an old friend like Mrs. Gilbert.
Mrs. Gilbert did not mean to dance, but there is a young lady disengaged who I should be very glad to see dancing. Miss Smith.
Miss Smith? Oh, I had not observed. You were extremely obliging, and if I were not an old married man, but my dancing days are over, Mrs. Weston. You will excuse me.
This was Mr. Elton, the amiable, obliging, gentle Mr. Elton.
Miss Smith, may I have the pleasure of a dance?
Ooh, thank you.
Never had Emma been more surprised. Seldom more delighted than at that instant. She was all pleasure and gratitude, both for Harriet and herself, and longed to be thanking him.
Knightley has taken pity on poor little Miss Smith. Very good-natured, I declare.
Supper was announced. The move began, and Miss Bates might be heard from that moment without interruption till her being seated at table and taking up her spoon.
Jane, my dear, where are you? Here is your tippet. Mrs. Weston begs you to put on your tippet. She says she is afraid there will be a draught in the passage. Though everything has been done, quantities of matting, my dear Jane. Indeed you must. Mrs. Weston, oh, you are too obliging. How well you put it on. So gratified. Yes, my dear, I ran home, as I said I should, to help Grandmama to bed, and got back again, and nobody missed me.
The Eltons are in fine form, and they aimed at wounding more than Harriet. Confess, Emma, that you did want him to marry Harriet.
I did, and they cannot forgive me. I was fully convinced of his being in love with Harriet. It was through a series of strange blunders.
And I will do you the justice to say that you would have chosen for him better than he has chosen for himself. Harriet Smith has some first-rate qualities, which Mrs. Elton is totally without. An unpretentious, single-minded, artless girl, infinitely to be preferred by any man of sense and taste to such a woman as Mrs. Elton. I found Harriet more conversible than I expected.
Come, Miss Woodhouse, Miss Fairfax, the dancing's about to start again. Come, Emma, set your companions the example.
I am ready whenever I am wanted.
Whom are you going to dance with?
With you, if you will ask me.
Will you?
Indeed I will. You have shown that you can dance, and you know we are not really so much brother and sister as to make it at all improper.
Brother and sister? No, indeed.
Nothing of a great moment occurred in Highbury for a long while, until one day when Harriet was the subject of a most unsettling occurrence.
Returning from a walk through the woods, she was accosted by some gypsies, and it was only through the lucky chance of Frank Churchill's arrival and some manly action on his part that she was saved from their most unwelcome attention. Hey, you there!
Such an adventure as this! A fine young man and a lovely young woman thrown together in such a way. Could hardly fail of suggesting certain ideas to the coldest of heart and steadiest brain. So Emma thought, at least, especially after a conversation with Harriet.
I shall never marry.
Harriet, I hope it does not proceed from what happened with Mr. Elton.
Mr. Elton, indeed? Oh, no. He is superior to Mr. Elton.
Harriet and Frank Churchill. Should Emma speak? Yes, she should. Harriet, I will not affect to be in doubt of your meaning. Your resolution, or rather your expectation of never marrying, results from an idea that the person whom you might prefer would be too greatly your superior in situation to think of you. Is it not so?
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, believe me, I have not the presumption to suppose, indeed I am not so mad, but it is a pleasure to me to admire him at a distance. And I think of his infinite superiority to all the rest of the world with gratitude, wonder, and veneration, which are so proper, especially in me.
I am not surprised at all at you, Harriet. The service he rendered you was enough to warm your heart.
Service? Oh, the very recollection of it, and all that I felt at the time, when I saw him coming, his noble look, and my wretchedness before. In one moment, such a change, from perfect misery to perfect happiness.
It is very natural, but be observant of him. Let his behavior be the guide of your sensations. I give you this caution now, because I shall never speak to you again on the subject. I am determined against all interference. But yet, Harriet, more wonderful things have taken place. There have been matches of greater disparity.
Harriet kissed her hand in silent, submissive gratitude.
It had long been agreed that everyone should follow a suggestion of Emma's and enjoy an expedition to Box Hill, a noted local beauty spot.
Emma felt constrained to include the Eltons in this party.
She is a good-natured woman after all. One could not leave her out.
Emma denied none of that aloud and agreed with none of it in private.
They had a very fine day for Box Hill. Emma and Harriet went together, Miss Bates and Miss Fairfax with the Eltons, the gentlemen on horseback. Nothing was wanting but to be happy when they got there.
How much I am obliged to you for persuading me to come today. I'm quite determined to go away again. But our companions need to be woken up. Any nonsense will serve. Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse, who, wherever she is, presides, to say that she desires to know what you are all thinking of.
Well said, Frank.
Why is Miss Woodhouse presiding?
Is Miss Woodhouse sure that she would like to hear what we are all thinking
Oh,
of?
no, upon no account in the world.
It is the sort of thing which I should not have thought myself privileged to inquire into, though perhaps as the chaperone of the party.
Very true, my love, very true. Better pass it off as a joke. Everybody knows what is due to you.
This is not working, Miss Woodhouse. I will attack them with more address. Ladies and gentlemen, I am ordered by Miss Woodhouse to say that she waives her right of knowing exactly what you may all be thinking of and only demands from each of you either one thing, very clever, or two things, moderately clever, or three things, very dull indeed. And she engages to laugh heartily at them all.
Oh, very well then. I need not be anxious. 3 things very dull indeed. That will just do for me. You know, I shall be sure to say 3 dull things as soon as I ever open my mouth, shan't I? Do you not all think that I shall?
Ma'am, but there may be a difficulty. Pardon me, but you will be limited as to number. Only 3 at once.
Well, to be sure, yes, I see what she means, and I will try to hold my tongue. I must make myself very disagreeable, for she would not have said such a thing to an old friend.
I like your plan. Agreed. I will do my best. How will a riddle reckon?
Perfectly. Come, sir, pray let us hear it.
I doubt it's being very clever myself, but here it is. What 2 letters of the alphabet are there that express perfection? You will never guess. I will tell you. M and A. Emma. Do you understand?
Mr. Weston has done very well for himself, but he must have defeated everyone else. Perfection should not have come quite so soon.
For myself, I protest, I must be excused. I really cannot attempt. I am not at all fond of this sort of thing. Miss Woodhouse must excuse me. I do not pretend to be a wit. I have a great deal of vivacity in my own way, but I really must be allowed to judge when to speak and when to hold my tongue. Pass us, if you please, Mr. Churchill. Pass Mr. E. Knightley, Jane, and myself. We have nothing clever to say, not one of us.
Yes, yes. Pray, pass me. I have nothing to say that can entertain Miss Woodhouse or any other young lady. Shall we walk, Augusta?
Happy couple. How well they suit one another. Very lucky, marrying as they did. Upon an acquaintance formed only in a public place. They only knew each other, I think, a few weeks in Bath. Peculiarly lucky. How many a man has committed himself on short acquaintance and rued it all the rest of his life?
Such things do occur, undoubtedly.
You were saying?
I was only going to observe that, though a hasty and imprudent attachment may arise, there is generally time to recover from it afterwards. It can only be weak, irresolute characters who will suffer an unfortunate acquaintance to be an inconvenience, an oppression forever.
Well, see, I have so little confidence in my own judgment that whenever I marry, I hope somebody shall choose a wife for me. Will you choose a wife for me, Emma? I'm sure I should like anybody fixed upon by you. Find somebody for me. I'm in no hurry. Adopt her, educate her.
And make her like myself.
Oh, by all means, if you can.
It was a commission to touch every favourite feeling. Would not Harriet be the very creature he had in mind?
Soon afterwards, the party broke up, but as they descended the hill, Mr. Knightley found a moment to have a private word with Emma.
Emma, how could you be so unfeeling to Miss Bates? How could you be so insolent in your wit to a young woman of her character, age, and situation? Emma, I had not thought it possible.
I'm sorry, but how could I help saying what I did? It was not so very bad. I dare say she did not understand me.
I assure you she did. She felt your full meaning. She has talked of it since. I wish you could have heard how she talked of it. With what candor and generosity. I wish you could have heard her honoring your forbearance in being able to pay her such attentions as she was forever receiving from yourself and your father, when her society must be so irksome.
Oh, I know there is not a better creature in the world, but you must allow that what is good and what is ridiculous are most unfortunately blended in her.
I acknowledge that. And were she a woman of fortune, I would not quarrel with you for any liberties of manner. Was she your equal in situation? But Emma, consider how far this is from being the case. She is poor. She has sunk from the comforts that she was born to, and if she lives to old age, must probably sink more. Her situation should secure your compassion. It was badly done indeed. You, whom she had known from an infant, to have you now, in faultless spirits and pride of the moment, laugh at her, humble her, and before her niece, too. Badly done, Emma. Badly done.
The truth of this representation there was no denying. How could she have been so brutal? So cruel to Miss Bates? How could she have exposed herself to such ill opinion in anyone she valued? And how suffer Mr. Knightley to leave her without saying one word of common kindness? Emma had never been more depressed, and she determined to visit Miss Bates the very next morning. Poor old Miss Bates, civil and humble as usual, looked as if she did not quite understand what was going on.
I am afraid Jane is not very well, but I do not know. I dare say my daughter will be downstairs presently, Miss Woodhouse. I hope you find a chair. I wish Hattie were here. Oh, I am very little able. Do you have a chair, Mum? Do you sit where you like? I am sure she will be here presently.
Ah, Miss Woodhouse, how kind you are to visit. I suppose you have heard and are come to give us joy. This does not seem much like joy indeed in me, but it will be very trying for us to part with her after having her for so long, and she has a dreadful headache just now, writing all the morning, such long letters, you know, to be written to Colonel Campbell and Mrs. Dixon.
The gist was that, thanks to the offices of Mrs. Elton, Jane had quite suddenly secured a governess post in which she would be expected to take up almost immediately.
Is her not coming down? Oh, said I, it is Miss Woodhouse. I am sure you would like to see her. I can see nobody, said she. And that was what made us keep you waiting, and extremely sorry and ashamed we were.
Of course, I understand.
So very kind, but then you are always kind.
The following day brought news from Richmond to throw everything else into the background. A messenger arrived at Randalls to announce the death of Mrs. Churchill.
Great Mrs. Churchill was no more. Mrs. Churchill, after being disliked at least 25 years, was now spoken of with compassionate allowances.
Now there could be no one to object of an attachment between Frank and Harriet Smith.
But the following day, Emma received an urgent message from Mrs. Weston and hurried to see her.
Emma, I must give you some news. Frank has been here this very morning on an extraordinary errand. He came to speak to his father on a subject, to announce an attachment.
Emma thought first of herself, oh, and then of Harriet.
More than an attachment, indeed. A positive engagement. What will you say, Emma? What will anybody say when it is known that Frank Churchill and Miss Fairfax are engaged?
Jane Fairfax?
And they've been long engaged.
Good God, you are not serious. You do not mean it.
You may well be amazed, but it is even so. There has been a solemn engagement between them ever since October, formed in Weymouth and kept a secret from everybody. I can hardly believe it. I thought I knew him. It has hurt me, Emma, very much. It has hurt his father equally. Some part of his conduct we cannot excuse.
If it helps, I can assure you, you need not be apprehensive on my account.
No?
It is true that there was a period in the early part of our acquaintance when I did like him, more than like. But I have really for at least these 3 months cared nothing about him. You may believe me, Mrs. Weston, this is the simple truth.
Mr. Weston will be almost as much relieved as myself. It was our darling wish that you might be attached to each other. Imagine what we might have been feeling on your account.
I have had a narrow escape. Oh, but Harriet, poor Harriet, I have done her nothing but disservice. And I dread meeting her.
Well, Miss Woodhouse, is not this the oddest news that ever was?
What news do you mean?
About Jane Fairfax. Did you ever hear anything so strange? Mr. Weston just told me himself.
What did Mr. Weston tell you?
That Jane Fairfax and Mr. Frank Churchill are to be married. Had you any idea of his being in love with her?
I promise you, Harriet, I never had the slightest suspicion till within the last hour of Mr. Frank Churchill's having the least regard for Jane Fairfax. You may be very sure that if I had, I should have cautioned you accordingly.
Me? Why would you caution me? You do not think I care about Mr. Frank Churchill?
Surely you...
Him? Never. Never. Dear Miss Woodhouse, how could you so mistake me?
Harriet, good heavens. What do you mean? Mistake you? Am I to suppose then that...
I know we agreed never to name him, but considering how infinitely superior he is to everybody else, I should not have thought it possible that I could be supposed to mean any other person. And if you had not told me that more wonderful things had happened, that there had been matches of greater disparity, those were your very words, I should not have dared to give way to. But if you, who had always been acquainted with him...
Harriet, let us understand each other now, without possibility of farther mistake. Are you speaking of Mr. Knightley?
To be sure I am. When we talked about him doing that great service for me, it was as clear as possible.
Not quite, for all that you then said appeared to me to relate to a different person. I am sure the service that Mr. Frank Churchill had rendered you in protecting you from the gypsies was spoken of.
The gypsies? I was talking about the kindness Mr. Knightley did me in asking me to dance when I had been so rudely snubbed by Mr. Elton.
Good God, this has been a most unfortunate, most deplorable mistake. What is to be done?
Dear Miss Woodhouse, if I should be so fortunate beyond expression as to... If Mr. Knightley should really... If he does not mind the disparity, I hope, dear Miss Woodhouse, you would not set yourself against it and try to put difficulties in the way. But you are too good for that, I am sure.
Have you any idea of Mr. Knightley's returning your affection?
Yes, I must say that I have.
A few minutes were sufficient for making Emma acquainted with her own heart. I darted through her with the speed of an arrow. That Mr. Knightley should marry no one but herself. The rest of the day, the following night, were hardly enough for her thoughts. To understand, thoroughly understand her own heart was the first endeavor. And till now that she was threatened with its loss, Emma had never known how much of her happiness depended on being first with Mr. Knightley. First in interest and affection, and then she examined her own behavior. With unsufferable vanity had she believed herself in the secret of everybody's feelings. With unpardonable arrogance proposed to arrange everybody's destiny. She was proved to have been universally mistaken. And she had done mischief. Were this most unequal of all marriages to take place, it would all be Emma's fault.
Emma did not have long to wait for the next encounter with Mr. Knightley, for he visited Hartfield the following day and proposed that they should take a walk in the grounds.
Emma thought he neither looked nor spoke cheerfully, and the first possible cause for it, suggested by her fears, was that he had perhaps been communicating his marriage plans to his brother, and was pained by the manner in which they had been received. He was sure he was going to talk about Harriet.
You have some news to hear now that you are come back that will rather surprise you.
Have I? Of what nature?
The best nature in the world. A wedding.
If you mean Miss Fairfax and Frank Churchill, I've heard that already. Mr. Weston told me this morning.
You have probably been less surprised than any of us, for you have had your suspicions. I have not forgotten that you once tried to give me caution. I wish I had attended to it. But I seem to have been doomed to blindness. For a moment or two, nothing was said, till she found her arm drawn with his and pressed against his heart.
Time, my dearest Emma, time will heal the wound. Abominable scoundrel.
Oh, Mr. Knightley, I cannot let you continue in your error. I never have been at all attached to the person of whom we are speaking. I never have. He has imposed on me, but he has not injured me.
I am relieved. As for Frank Churchill, everything turns out for his good. He meets by chance the perfect woman at a resort. His wealthy aunt is in the way. His aunt dies. He had used his friends ill, and they are all delighted to forgive him. He is a fortunate man indeed.
Speak as if you envied him.
And I do envy him, Emma. In one respect, he is the object of my envy.
They seemed to be within half a sentence of Harriet, and Emma's immediate feeling was to avert the subject, if possible.
You are determined, I see, to have no curiosity. You will not ask me what is the point of my envy. You are wise. But I cannot be wise. Emma, I must tell you what you will not ask, though I may wish it unsaid the next moment.
Oh, then don't speak it. Don't speak it. Take a little time. Consider. Do not commit yourself.
Thank you.
I stopped you ungraciously, Mr. Knightley, and I am afraid gave you pain. But if you have any wish to speak openly to me as a friend, or to ask my opinion of anything that you may have in contemplation, as a friend, indeed you may command me. I will hear whatever you like. I will tell you exactly what I think.
As a friend? Emma, that I fear is a word. No, I have no wish. Sorry. Say yes. Why should I hesitate? Emma, I accept your offer. Extraordinary as it may seem, I accept it and refer myself to you as a friend. Tell me then, have I no chance of ever succeeding? My dearest Emma, for dearest you will always be. Whatever the event of this conversation, my dearest, most beloved Emma, tell me at once. Say no if it is to be said. I cannot make speeches, Emma. If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more. But you know what I am. You hear nothing but truth from me. I have blamed you and lectured you, and you have borne it as no other woman in England would have done it. God knows I have been a very indifferent lover, but you understand my feelings and will return them if you can. At present, I ask only to hear from your voice.
And what else would she reply but... Oh no, what about my father?
But Emma, you always said you would never marry. Think of poor Miss Taylor.
But I will still be here, Papa. Mr. Knightley has himself offered to come and live at Hartfield.
Yes, but...
And should you not be glad to see him every day?
But I do see him every day as it is. Why cannot we go on as we have always done?
News of the engagement quickly spread.
Oh, Emma, the perfect match.
We could not be happier for you both.
They are both always so kind to us.
Oh, thank you, Miss Woodhouse. We are so obliged to be told. But then, as I was saying to Jane only the other day, or was it when she was there to set her pianoforte, and you know I
Only hope the young lady's pride will now be contented. Of course, she has always meant to catch Knightley if she could.
I hear he used to live with her and her father at Hartfield.
Rather he than I.
Poor Knightley! How could he be so taken in? No more pleasant evenings with us. Oh no, there will now be a Mrs. Knightley to play Lady of the Manor. Extremely disagreeable.
So obliged, so very, very obliged.
Emma could have been perfectly happy were it not for poor Harriet.
I have something to tell you, Emma. Some news.
Good or bad?
I'm very much afraid, my dear Emma, that you will not smile when you hear it.
Indeed.
You're prepared for the worst, I see, and very bad it is. Harriet Smith is to marry Robert Martin.
Good God!
And as far as the man is concerned, you could not wish your friend in better hands.
You need not be at any pains to reconcile me to the match. I think Harriet is doing extremely well, and most sincerely wish them happy.
You're materially changed since we talked on this subject.
I hope so, for at that time I was a fool.
Oh, one other thing. I was talking to your father this morning.
Poor father. He has been in a state of much alarm since Mrs. Weston's poultry house was broken into and she lost all her turkeys.
As a consequence of which constant state of fear for his safety, he has experienced a profound change of heart in concerning another matter.
We are not safe. I beg you to come and live with us at Hartfield as soon as convenient, Mr. Knightley. And if that entails marrying Emma, then so be it. Though, why can't you simply go on as you are?
Oh, Mr. Knightley.
Mr. Knightley, you always call me Mr. Knightley. I want you to call me something else, but I do not know what.
I remember once calling you George in one of my amiable fits about 10 years ago. I did it because I thought it would offend you, but as you made no objection, I never did it again.
And can you call me George now?
Impossible! I never can call you anything but Mr. Knightley. I'm certainly not going to emulate Mrs. Elton by calling you Mr. K.
Oh, God, no.
But I will promise. I will promise to call you at least once by your Christian name in the building in which N takes M for better, for worse.
The wedding was very much like other weddings, where the parties have no taste for finery or parade.
Extremely shabby and very inferior to my own, Mr. E. Very little white satin, very few lace veils. A most pitiful business.
But in spite of these deficiencies, the wishes, the hopes, the confidence, the predictions of the small band of true friends who witnessed the ceremony were fully answered in the perfect happiness of the union.
In Emma by Jane Austen, the part of Emma was played by Sophie Cameron. Mr. Knightley by Michael Novello. Mr. Woodhouse by Richie Porter. Mrs. Weston by Dre Weeks. And Mr. Weston by Keith Anderson. Miss Bates was played by Cassie Gabriel. Mrs. Bates by Celeste Lucid Weiser. Jane Fairfax by Meg LeBeau. And Frank Churchill by Langston Cotman. Harriet was played by Maddie Sperber White. Mrs. Elton by Liz Porter. And Mr. Elton by Sam Felsenthal. The recording was edited by Liz Porter. Thank you for joining us for this evening's performance reading. As always, if you enjoyed the performance, please consider making a donation to Lumina Studio Theater. Just go to our website at luminastudio.org. Your support keeps the arts alive and helps make these performances possible. On April 11th, tune in to the same channel at 7 p.m. for the timeless comedy by Kaufman and Hart, You Can't Take It With You. Thank you, and have a great rest of the evening.